was saying, so great to have everybody here. My name is Dr. Brinen. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Drexel's College of Medicine, where I am fortunate to lead a center and direct a center on the dissemination and treatment development and provision of recovery-oriented cognitive therapy. As a part of this, I've been really lucky to partner with the people at the University of Pennsylvania to do training for first episode psychosis. When all of this started, we had the idea to create a series of webinars just to get information out to people. Today's is about families, this idea of them as this really wonderful magic ally in recovery-oriented cognitive therapy and engaging individuals in. And this is families in the most broad sense. Families can be really close friends. Families can be mom and dad, could be brother and sister, could be our children, people's children. Anybody who is has a relationship with the individual, may be living with the individual, but the individual has regular contact with. That's who we're going to be thinking about when we think about families. And they are so crucial. So it's not just because of the isolation that they become critical, but the isolation gives us a little bit of a chance to rethink how do we engage them in. Okay. Okay. So, what is today's trainings going to be about? Part of it's developing strategies to keep and support families during this time, which is really anxiety provoking for many of us. And I think that's helpful for us all to acknowledge is that many of us are feeling really anxious at this time. Also, the idea of how do we equip families to become capable allies during this time. There are things that we can do that are going to be more successful and things that we're going to do that are be a little bit less successful. And so how do we equip families to feel more successful during that time? Uh, every one of my webinars seems to usually have a what's not the purpose. We're not talking about doing really in-depth family therapy. It's not that the families can't learn how to be better teams together at the end of this, but that's really not what we're talking about today. This isn't about how do you do family therapy. It's how do you engage families as an ally in that. So we do. I think I keep coming back to this idea in every talk I've been giving over the isolation. We're in unprecedented times. This situation, nobody that I know has ever seen this in their lifetime, and we really don't know. Um, uh, the idea of knowing how to do this doesn't make much sense. I've used the example recently. I was going down to the state of Georgia when they had that big when they had that big snowstorm that crippled Atlanta, and people said, "Well, how are you not prepared for that?" And I told everybody right back, not being from Georgia at all, there's no reason that they should be prepared for that. Why would Georgia buy all of this infrastructure to take care of snow when they were at that point not getting snow? And so, same thing here. Why would we be prepared for some of these things and know how to deal with them when we really had never seen that? We've never really seen that in our lifetime. So, right now, there are high levels of uncertainty, and we're all feeling that. The largest amount of it, we're in a time when we have the largest amount of information available, at our fingertips, which is also a problem because we're at a time in history when we have the largest amount of information available at our fingertips, which can be really frightening. And it can be really frightening for families because they're constantly bombarded with new information from every different from every different angle. Some of it's correct, some of it might not be correct. We're more connected, but also more isolated at the same time. We'll all be in the same house. We have the ability to connect with people all over the world. Right before this call, I got a wonderful message from friends in two different places in England, friends in Oxford and friends in Northern England, about how they're doing and what they're doing. But at the same time, we can feel really isolated as we walk around and not see ourselves as connected. We also have no understanding or clear end in sight, which can really raise our anxiety. Humans are not designed to appreciate uncertainty. That's not one of our strong suits. which can lead to a lot of suspiciousness. So it's not just the individuals that we're serving who are going to be suspicious, but many of the families might be suspicious as to why things are happening, or whether they can trust what's going to happen next, and whether people are going to be there. And so when we start becoming suspicious, we start second guessing why things are working or why things aren't working. So it all leads to a lot of anxiety. And anxiety never makes anything much better. So high levels of anxiety are never that helpful. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we're all worried. Probably, right now we have a lot of people on this phone call. I've been seeing a lot of people have been using these resources, and so we can say as a fact, we're all worried about the individuals that we serve. Right, the families are worried about the individuals we serve, and we're worried about our individuals. We want to make sure that they're okay. Every supervision call I've had, people are talking about not the extra work they have to do, but they're talking about really being concerned, that maybe a kid was accepted to school and how is they going to be able to go to school, or they just got excited about applying for jobs. So families feel that too. Every hope we feel for the individuals we serve, the families feel 100 times over. It might be this just wonderful experience, that's really exciting. And so families, as we see this is going to grind on further and further and further, families can start feeling really, they might start feeling demoralized. They might start feeling upset. They want to make sure that their loved one is okay as well. Families are getting worried about increased symptoms, as are we all. The reason why Monday's workshop, webinar, revolved around suspiciousness and paranoia, really came from the fact that almost every phone call I was on at the beginning of the isolation, the people I was supervising or consulting with were asking about suspiciousness and paranoia. So we're all worried that in a time of isolation, that the individuals we serve are going to have an increase in symptoms, and families probably are feeling this, or we know that families are feeling this just as much. They've been on the front lines when things like paranoia have gotten worse, grandiosity has gotten worse, hallucinations get worse and draw the individual further back. And then if the young person the young person or the individual we serve becomes suspicious, the hallucinations might be getting worse, but the suspiciousness fuels, um, uh, um, voices that are being telling them not to trust people. And so the people that the families that we're working with are going to see that, and they know that this is a pattern, that they can end up in. At the same time, the families and we all are starting to get worried about decreased engagement in activities and treatment. Right, a lot of the people that we've talked about, and in fact, at the end of today, I'm going to say we're slotting in a new webinar, addressing people who are not engaging and the really difficult to engage people. And so families know that is the song that leads to that's the siren song that leads to symptoms getting much much worse. And so these things, are happening more and more. Absolutely, OCD symptoms we're going to see get worse. And if we sort of break ourselves out of a DSM way of seeing things, we can also look at anxiety about things like contamination and illness. Right, so worries will lead to more avoidance. Even right now, I know when I go out, for a walk with my dog, I'm doing things when I come home that are much more avoidant and reassurance seeking than I normally would. Well, that's going to fuel a lot of the psychosis in the individuals that we serve. At the end, we can talk about things, related to OCD and those types of things, as well. So, so if we're worried about it, so are our families, and they're more worried. And so we're going to talk about how do we get families on board and what they can do, but also thinking really clearly about that it's going to be across the range. So I just started engaging a brand new individual, and I've got a lot of work to do to get the family on board with how to help this young. Actually, he's not that young. I just call everybody young people. You never get in trouble when you call somebody young, right? Nobody's ever said like, no, no, no. But this one person getting the family on board is really difficult. And then there's individuals who I've been serving for a very long time, and getting the families on board is pretty great. But I'm, even thinking about next week for one of my individuals, trying to get the whole family on a Zoom, so that way we can all work together, and I can help them be a little bit more successful. I don't know that the family is being like particularly successful because they're getting anxious. And when humans get anxious, we try to control things a lot more. So families and anxiety. Um, so oh, good, I can move this. The Right now I'm having a little bit of a problem because the comment section, which is helpful because I can see everybody's comments now, is right over my slides. Okay. So providers care and worry deeply about the individuals that they serve. Families, you know, um, the families have been through this, right? Many individuals, many families that I've worked with say, this is great that you want to do all this stuff, but when you're gone, Dr. Brennan, and I've heard them say this to teams also. When you guys are gone, I'm the one who's going to be there with my loved one, and so they've been through really scary. Some of them have been through really scary episodes, and few of the people that we're going to serve, few of the families that we're going to serve, are going to uh, have been trained in any of this. So this is the first time they're seeing something like a hallucination or a delusion or any type of mental health concern at all. So this might be their first time being exposed to it. Um, the families really hold their hopes. If you think about, if anybody here has a niece or a nephew or a younger brother or sister or a child, we have these hopes for the people that we love, and those hopes sit really deeply in us. And so the idea of threats to those hopes are really painful for families. Um, in this time where we're all seeing, fewer and fewer resources, many families are going to start fearing that they're going to be left alone to manage with their loved ones. Um, so yeah, we'll talk about that at the end about assisted living. Um, and so many of the individuals that we serve are going to be the original providers, right? They're going to be the people who originally helped with these things. And so as everybody is becoming less and less available, we're going to start seeing them feeling like they're on this on their own. So they're going to try to control the situation, which can be helpful because they can feel really empowered to be a partner, but they can also start engaging in a way where they're not. It's not as easy to. They might do things that might not be as helpful in helping the individual come out. But they are the front line during this crisis. So helping us to remember that, and respect them, and respect the fact that like I said, they were the original, their individual's original act team, and so validating the choices that they made, even if they might have not been the best choices when they were making them, validating those choices along the way. So the families are going to be the key as we're trying to engage. I know a lot of the concern people have had is how do we engage individuals through telehealth, and particularly people who don't trust telehealth or just don't want to do it. So our families are going to be the key to getting individuals engaged in treatment. Engaging families into the treatment will be the key. Families are always a key ally in treatment. So this isn't a telehealth thing. This is, hopefully some of these principles that we're talking about, we can apply once we get back to sort of visiting the house or having a session in our offices or wherever you treat people. The families can be really wonderful in drawing out an individual. Some of the very people on this call or on this video have really been helpful in engaging families in a way where where the family starts drawing the individual out, because the families are there all the time. So if you engage in an activity, the young person or the individual that we're serving is likely to become drawn out. The families will also provide a partnership in engaging in much more productive activity. So while we might be on a call, on a video call, or we may have an hour session with the individual we serve, the families are there all the time. So they almost become, if you think about the old coping cards or the recovery cards, families are like walking, talking recovery cards. They can constantly be inviting the individual out into more productive activity. They also can bridge the individual from isolation all the way through to treatment. So a lot of the conversations we've been talking is about how do we engage the family, and then as the family becomes more engaged, really figuring out a way to branch the individual from being productive toward maybe trying to engage in treatment a little bit through the telehealth, even if it's for short periods of time. Um, And we can also help the families as well. We can really help them out in sort of feeling more comfortable, reducing their worry, and helping them feel really capable. I think one of the things that isn't always thought about families is how demoralized they can feel, and how incapable they feel, but also how, as parents, as family members, not being able to help a loved one is one of the most painful experiences that you can have. Anybody who's ever had to take their a child or a little person to an ER, there's nothing more helpless feeling than not being able to help your child out. And so that's the very situation families oftentimes find themselves in. So the first thing we're going to do when we're talking with families, whoever those people might be, and a lot of these principles we might need to apply to assisted living facilities, getting them engaging to sort of to move other people forward. Um, so all of us are on edge, right? So helping families understand as they're feeling really freaked out, saying we're all feeling, validate that they're feeling freaked out, validating that they're worrying, and then help them understand, I hear you because I'm feeling, if you are feeling uneasy, saying everybody I'm talking to has been feeling uneasy. I get calls all the time about how people are just feeling on edge and uncomfortable, and this just feels weird. So if you're comfortable sharing that, it could be a really nice message going, you're not wrong for being on edge. Everybody's seems like they're on edge these days. Many of us are worrying about increased symptoms. Um, Many of the families are really worrying about the loss of the gains that the person has made, and then the idea that they might develop into larger symptoms, that the individual that they're living with might get much worse, and so people worry about those things. So we can really help the people start to decatastrophize, right? Meaning we can say, yes, I hear you. Your fears are valid. I get where you're coming from. And then starting to go, is it going to be the worst thing? If your loved one has an increase in symptoms, have you had that happen before? Right? Um, Perhaps they will get worse. Perhaps they won't get worse. Have you ever noticed that in a time of, whether it's been a hurricane or an earthquake or a snowstorm, have you ever noticed that sometimes the person that you live with, all of a sudden, they become the go-to person? Have you ever seen that part? So maybe the symptoms will get worse. Maybe they won't. Um, Maybe we're not going to get this job that we went out for, but maybe it'll still be there. And even if the symptoms get worse, have we dealt with that before? So one of the things is going, it might happen, it might not happen, but maybe sort of worrying about it isn't going to help. And also helping them say, listen, we've handled these things before. And you might go through how we all came together around a time when symptoms got worse for a person that they're serving. Um, Also helping the family remember that in the past, when you went through that episode, You didn't have a team around you, or you didn't have a therapist. Sometimes I say to people, you didn't have a Dr. Brinen. And so now you have a Dr. Brinen. And so that's different. And so this time going through it, I'm going to be available. I'll be able to talk to somebody. I'll be able to talk with you during this time through. And so you're not all alone. We also have a lot more information. We know why the person that you love sometimes feels really suspicious about people. We figured that out. So if they become suspicious, we'll know what the answer is. So we have a lot more answers to the test this time. So this is more of like a post test versus a pre test, helping families think about it in that way. The next part in this one might not go over well. And so you may just acknowledge you're not going to like this. But part of the things we can start doing is practicing a little bit of acceptance, saying, um, yeah, we might have a problem. But trying to push it or control it might put us in a much worse position in helping your loved one. So the individual, they probably will. And just accepting the idea that they probably will get worse. They probably will have a little bit of paranoia. They probably will hear their voices a little bit more. And let's just accept that. Worrying only means that we're not going to engage the person. So we have a limited amount of time. Even though we have a lot of time on our hands now, we still only have a very limited amount of time. And so we can spend our time worrying that your loved one is going to be getting worse, and calling and preparing for your loved one getting worse. Or we can spend our mental energy figuring out how to engage them, and what's been successful in the past and doing those things. So if we accept that the symptoms might get worse, then we free ourselves up to focus in on helping our loved one in this situation. It's going to be uncomfortable, right? And might accept the fact that if the person does become suspicious, that it will be uncomfortable. It might be scary, right? There might be a time or a night where things get like really dicey or feel really bad. And just accepting that that's going to happen and figuring out what are the things that we've come up with that are usually really successful. And it's going to be demoralizing, right? It's going to be a bummer. The idea that our seeing our loved one in pain or distressed. And once we accept that that might happen, or the chance that that might happen, then we can free ourselves up to be more effective. With acceptance, we're going to start focusing in on what we're going to do. There's a great line from Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, where he says, "The way I see it, worrying means you suffer twice." And so we can worry right now as all of this stuff is happening, and then wait. I think the other problem with worry and planning for symptom exacerbation is we do this thing that I've heard a lot in I usually hear this in hospitals. People talk about, oh, they're on their honeymoon phase, right? They're going through their honeymoon. And I get the concept. The problem is if we're sitting and waiting for the honeymoon to be over, then we're not engaging that person and helping them see this other way that they can be for that week or 2 weeks that the person's on their honeymoon phase. So same thing here. If we're sitting here waiting for the next shoe to drop, that might be tomorrow. That might be 3 weeks from now. But in that time period, that individual is acting in a way that's much more successful. So let's reinforce the success in those times versus waiting for the problem to come. So we're going to start helping once we've really engaged the family, and maybe even also helping to engage in a little bit of problem solving with them. Right? Some of the when we talk about self-care on Monday, some of those things might be helpful for the families to think about. So, but once we really accept it, meet them where they're at, help them feel that the team is there for them, it's time for us to think about how are we going to be more effective? How are we going to be less effective? So the first step in any type of treatment, in any type of effectiveness, is developing an understanding or a formulation. The more we understand why the things are happening and what are leading them to happen, the better equipped we're going to be to deal with it. So we want to develop an understanding and formulation of the symptoms. So every one of the symptoms that an individual can experience, there is a nice literature on why those things are happening. Many of the individuals that you've been serving already for a long period of time, you probably have a good formulation of why the symptoms happen. So things like suspiciousness and paranoia, those don't come out of the blue. Things like hallucinations don't come out of the blue. Thought disorder, negative symptoms, OCD symptoms. We all have a really good understanding of why those things are happening. So we want to make sure that we have it developed for the individual. Many times in training, I find that people are trying to do stuff really quickly, and instead, what I encourage people to do is figure out why you're doing it. So that way, what you do is going to be more effective. So we're going to go for a scalpel approach to interacting with people versus sort of like a big machete. Sorry, that's a terrible metaphor. So the things that we want to look for: isolation and avoidance, even within the house. Right? If I'm avoiding doing things, avoiding thinking about things, remember, avoidance works in the short run. I feel better when I avoid that thing that makes me distressed, but it makes things worse in the long run. I stop taking in new data. So we want to consider situations like isolation, avoidance, worry, and rumination. The more time I spend on that merry-go-round in my head, the worse I end up feeling. The worse my the intrusive thoughts I have happen, the worse my suspiciousness is, the worse my voices get. Stress doesn't make any symptom that I can ever think of better. So uncontrolled stress rarely seems to make the situation better. It usually makes it worse. Things like hypervigilance and then types of cognitive distortions. So things like jumping to conclusions, those types of thinking things, really figuring out how does it come together within the individual that you're serving, and then making sure that the family sees, oh, when little Johnny spends all day in his room, he doesn't sleep at night. When he doesn't sleep at night, he becomes a little bit more distressed. And so when he becomes a little bit more distressed, he doesn't want to sleep at night because he's worried that something bad is going to happen. So what we need to do is, one, let's not tell him nothing bad's going to happen, as we're all holed up in our houses during a pandemic. But really helping him to sleep better, really helping him to see, when does he have more energy, when does he have less energy, right? But it comes from that understanding of, he tells himself something bad's going to happen. He becomes more hyper vigilant about that. And so then he isolates in his room. And then really getting into the beliefs. What are the lessons I've learned about myself, the future, others, and the world? And how do they impact my day to day? What do I do in response to those? So at this time, it's going to be good as teams to really be thinking about the individuals we serve. Or if you're a sole practitioner, talk with your friends, reach out for consultation to figure out what are the things, what are the patterns that the individual is involved in. And then making sure on a very simple level that families can understand that. Once we have a good formulation and a good understanding, everything that happens should be much more predictable. I like to say to people, you might not be happy that it happened, but you're not surprised. And so being less surprised is much better than even though you might not like what happens. Also, once we develop an understanding, a lot of the solutions aren't rocket science. So helping somebody with sleep isn't this really difficult intervention. Helping somebody feel a little bit better about themselves or engage in more activity isn't the most difficult thing. Um, So somebody actually just asked if we substitute unit staff for family, we should be able to achieve the same thing, and that's absolutely true. We can think about that as well. So we're going to think about individuals in a nice, simple way of helping families sort of organize it. Is the idea that there are times when our loved one is there's a time where it just seems like they're normal. And I've heard a lot of families say this to me. We were coming back from grandma's, and all of a sudden it was like Johnny was like normal. It was just sort of like we've seen him a million times, and then just as quickly he slipped back in. And anytime you've sort of gotten frustrated of asking all the questions you have to ask for like a treatment team or treatment plan or something like that, and you go, "Oh heck, have you seen? Did you see the football game this weekend?" And they say no because all of them have been canceled. And then you go, uh, and then the person just comes to life and starts talking about, how are they going to do the Olympics, and what's the impact on swimmers? Because if a swimmer is out of the pool for more than a week at that level, it's like they haven't been training at all. And this person comes to life. That's the individual when they're in this sort of adaptive mode. And there are things that we can do naturally that draw them into this adaptive mode. And just as easily, there's ways that we can elicit this patient mode. The times where the individual seems really that there's a lot of symptoms, that they're having a lot of problems. So that's very much the patient mode. And so helping families understand there are things we're going to do that will elicit that adaptive mode, and things that we're going to do that are going to elicit that patient mode. And then starting to ask them, when do you notice that Johnny's, kind of feels like his normal self? And then we're going to add in some other ways of, then we're going to start getting into it, and figuring out some real specific things that could be much more likely to engage the person. So, really, what we're talking about here, the name of the game is this set of symptoms that we think of that are the negative symptoms. They're really problems with motivation and problems with connection. And really, the family becomes a wonderful ally in dealing with those negative symptoms. Because really, what we're trying to do is get people motivated, connected, and doing stuff. Not busy, but engaged in activities. When we have low motivation and low connection, we have times for increased distressing voices, worry about persecution, stress. People have less time on their hands, right? When we all go and we isolate. Another interesting message to give people is a lot of the messages I'm giving us about the individuals we serve are messages that I'm giving when I'm talking on webinars, whether it's with a synagogue or a church, or when we talk on Monday. We're going to hear a lot of the same messages of making sure that we're scheduling and doing the things that are important to us. So this CTR protocol, and if anybody hasn't had the CTR training, um, there'll be more of those things. Obviously, we at Drexel are available to come and give more detailed trainings in it. But essentially, this idea of activating people into this adaptive mode, right? We're going to activate those. And that's those simple ways of talking about sports, cooking together, talking about movies, listening to music together. Those times where it just seems like out of nowhere, that person just seems like you're talking to a regular person. Once you have that energy, then we're going to try to get the individual's aspirations. Essentially, we need enough access to mental energy that a person can think about aspirations, and then from there it'll motivate more action. But at the same time, activation, really getting an individual sort of their mental energy up, allows for planning more activity, right? And again, as we plan people engaging in more activity, it'll be more useful. So engagement's going to take lots of different formats with the individuals. Just normal action, just talking about stuff that people like to talk about, right? So we're going to kind of prime them for talking a little bit more, helping them with the things that are distressing to them. So a little simple gift of relief can be useful, and then ultimately really talking about the aspirations. So the important message to give to families and other providers is we're not doing like a bait and switch. We're not saying, oh, hey, what do you think is going to happen with the Eagles this year? And then turn it into like this deep therapy session of, you know, why are you so connected to the Eagles? Does it remind you of freedom? Like, we're not trying to do that. We're just trying to have a good experience together. And so that's the important piece of it. So we're not trying to trick the person into therapy. We're trying to get them energized and doing more. So we're going to think again about the things that will draw the individual out. So remember, Whether you live in a McMansion, a one-bedroom apartment, a small house, wherever you're living, we're all contained inside. So think about the behaviors that are going to really draw people out. Make sure the families don't get seduced by solving problems. We so want to reduce the distress for the people that we love that we can just get drawn into trying to solve the problems all the time. Instead, train the family in this point of activation. And we talked a lot about activation on the first webinar, but do things together, right? The activations that are likely to draw the individual in, right, or draw them out of where they are. So the ones that are going to do it are the ones that smell. Choose activation things. Do things in your house that smell a lot, right? So, for example, you might bake bread, right? You might bake cookies. You might cook something for dinner. The other night we made tiki masala, a vegan version of it. That has a lot of smell. Choose choose um, uh, recipes that also have a memory, right? Maybe they love baking cookies with you. Or with the family member. Really try and do that. Bake the cookies because the cookies are going to smell good and it's going to draw them out to go, what are you doing? Right? Um, Choose ones that are loud, right? So if you're listening to music, turn the music up, right? If you're watching a YouTube clip about goats that scream like Taylor Swift and goats that scream like humans, make it loud. Do stuff that's going to draw them out, and then try to lure them into activity with you. Um, Draw them into things where there are ways that they can help. Not necessarily like chores, but if I'm trying to get my Zoom to work for a webinar, maybe they can help me do that. If I'm trying to make a video for work, maybe I can draw my loved one into doing that as well. And also activities that are sort of within proximity. So I might watch a video, but I'm going to do it and I'm going to sit on the same couch as my loved one, right? Or I might sort of go upstairs if there's a place to sit upstairs and do that activity. So in my house, if I'm talking or watching videos, there's a good chance that somebody upstairs is going to hear me. I'm also insufferably loud. So my family lets me know all the time that I'm like really, really loud and really, really annoying, which is true. They're honest. What can I say? So the other part of it, and really, I want to go back just one second because this here, uh, help them understand that this is going to be the best way of going after the symptoms of avolition, anhedonia, and asociality. So this thing here that we're asking them to do is really important. So if they're like, "Isn't that stupid?" or "Aren't I rewarding them?" No, this is going to be one of the best ways to draw them in, and have the family members think about what are the things that this person loves doing, and just have them do it. So this is not petty. This is not sort of just for fun. These are really important activities that are going to draw people in. So one of the other things that family members can do is really help loved ones with sort of get a little bit of relief of distress, right? And so we could do things like there's all things that there are many of us who are engaging in activities like stress reduction, mindfulness. We can even do things together that reduce the voices or help them refocus in on other techniques. The nice part about it is, and this is a study by Dan Freeman, I talked about it on Monday, is that many of these things that the family members can engage their loved one in um, are actually targets that individuals want treated. So instead of us talking about suspiciousness or paranoid delusions and stuff like that, where they go, "Listen, I'm fine, leave me alone," these are the targets that people want help with. So the family members can do that. They're not difficult. They're not difficult things for people to work on. Many of us have tried to tackle problems with sleep on our own, or problems with being inactive on our own, or worry or self-esteem. It's really about not that the individual our loved one is broken or mentally ill. It's about we all need to focus in on worry or sleep or exercise during this time. And so this message of mental wellness is a family affair is going to be important. These also become these times where we can sort of tap the clinical team. So if we make bread together, we could say, "Oh, have you texted Sam? Did you show Sam a video of this? Isn't that funny that we did that? That we made those things. Have you let them know what's going on? Oh, let me know what they say back." So now all of a sudden we're creating this bridge with the clinical team, or the family members starting to make this bridge with the clinical team. Same thing if we're having trouble with sleep or worrying, being like, man, I went through all this stuff online and we tried this app. I wonder, do you think Nick has any ideas, or do you think Dominic has any ideas? Can you get an idea for me? Right. So if I'm as a dad, I go, can you get an idea for me? Because I'm really worried and I want help. And listen, do it only if have the family member do it only if it's genuine. Is say, hey, I'm having trouble sleeping. Can you ask Dominic? And then all of a sudden they call up, but now we're making that connection and we're starting to establish that there's a value to the clinical team that the young person or the individual is engaged in. um, the last part of it is, as we start to do these things, have it move from, basically start creating routines from these fun things that you did. So for example, my daughter made challah like 2 weeks ago. Well, now Friday, believe it or not, this will be our third week where she's making, and it's vegan challah. And so it's sort of become this routine that they're doing. And so part of their weekly routine is that we walk the dog together. So my wife and I have our weekly routine, or our daily routine, really. And even though we're both doing webinars this week, we made sure this morning at 8 a.m. we got our shoes on and we took the dog for the walk. To be fair, I think the dog is ready for us all to go back to work. She's like, okay, too many walks. So we having the family start going, oh, this has been fun. When are we doing it next? Plan to repeat them. Plan to make them a routine. Oh, hey, let's do it every morning at 8. Nobody's out on the street, right? And then starting to think about, oh, I like going for a walk in the morning. Do you think we should do it at night so that way we get our blood going? You can help me with my high blood pressure because my doctor's been wanting me to walk more. And so making those things. And then again, having them share those things with the provider. Oh, hey, we started doing macrame. And so do you think that's true? My daughter started doing macrame. And so she, sharing it with the provider, putting up a YouTube clip, making a video of yourself doing it together as a family. But it's this idea of sharing, but then the provider who the individual might be avoiding becomes a part of the family. So the distress and the defensiveness goes down. There's some things we want to encourage the families to avoid, right? Because as we become more anxious, we could potentially make some more mistakes. So we all want to increase control in these times. And so the more we try to grab at the loved one, the more that loved one's going to withdraw away. And then then the family members are going to get freaked out. And so they're going to try to control more. And then the loved one is going to pull away more. We're going to end up in this back and forth problem over and over and over again. So avoid overly focusing on patient-focused problems. So if in the family member's mind they start with, well, we need to do this because of your schizophrenia, or we know you need to do this because of your psychosis, it's probably a topic that we don't want to do. So repeatedly asking about medication, really kind of like being on top of them about the medication, that's just going to make them feel like they're broken and they're not a part of it. Listen, if a family member takes medication, make it a part of your morning routine that you guys do together. And so it's not like you need to take your medicine going, oh, I'm scheduling a time for my medication because I can forget it when I have all of this unscheduled time. But repeatedly saying, did you take your medicine? If they're being more suspicious, going, did you take your medicine? We're just getting into this sort of warden prisoner dynamic. Repeatedly asking about symptoms. Are you feeling okay? Are you feeling okay? Are you feeling okay? It can get really frustrating for any of us if we're constantly being asked, "Are you okay? Are you okay? How are you doing?" You know, if you see that they're struggling, you can say, "I love you dearly. It feels like today's a tough day. Let me know if I can be of help, or let me know if you just want to go for a walk, or what could we do?" Right? Again, getting back into activity as much as possible. A lot of catastrophizing around substance use or cannabis use. Um, I've said this before. I don't think that the isolation is the time to get into sort of like a reefer madness approach. I'm not saying let somebody do it or have them do it a lot. I'm also saying that if we've been struggling with the fact that that an individual is smoking weed, now is not the time to break them of it. Um, Trying to control another creature is rarely going to be successful. When we're talking about cannabis, and I talked about this on the last one, but this is just a reminder. Family members can be factual. It's not the time for confrontation. There was a great study by Dan Freeman's group in Oxford, which is a funny. I always like funny stories because it isn't about like, don't smoke weed, you're going to get paranoid. But they gave 121 individuals. They split them up. Individuals who had used THC in the past or cannabis in the past, and who had been who had paranoia, and so they split them up and they give half of them THC and half of them placebo. And the people who had THC, significantly more of them experienced paranoid thoughts. But the people who had the placebo oftentimes acted high. So it wasn't like they go, "Oh, I know this isn't real because I can feel it." So the people who were getting the placebo were acting high, but the people who were getting the THC, many more of them reported paranoid thoughts, as well as other kind of weird anomalous experiences. So we can go, "I don't know what you want to do, but it might be time to be, better safe than sorry now." Also looking at just the pragmatics of, really complimenting your loved one, complimenting the loved one on how they are trying to be really good about the physical distancing. And so if they run out, or if they have to go out and get more weed, it means that they're not practicing that, and you don't know who that person had been in contact with. So it's going after fact and pragmatics over sort of this like reefer madness approach. Anybody who doesn't know what reefer madness is, I encourage you to sort of look that up. So as family members might become more worried, we want to encourage them around persistence, and then helping them to develop a perspective. So remember that activating the loved one is a numbers game. Okay, there's not going to be a one and done. There's not going to be a surefire one that will always work. And so share, if you've been doing CTR, or this is sort of your practice anyway, share with the families your experiences. Share with them the things that have worked wonderfully. Especially share with them the times you knew you were going to activate an individual, you knew you were going to be successful, and it absolutely flopped. Right? The ones that you're like, this is going to be it. I'm going to nail it. And you go in and the person looks at you with a blank face and does not talk to you at all. Um, Help them exactly. So lack of engagement is not going to be considered a failure. Lack of engagement is just another opportunity. Early on in my life, I did cold calls. And so they basically said every time you get I know, which sounds horrible, but every time somebody says no and hangs up on you, you're just one step closer to that 100 calls, because it takes 100 calls to make a sale. So same thing here. Every time your loved one kind of shuts the door and doesn't engage, you're just one step closer to getting them engaged. Try the same ones again, right? So you might try making cookies again, or you might try making a dish again, or you might try playing music again, but also then try new ones. So don't just think because somebody doesn't respond to the first engagement, the first time of trying to activate them, that it's a dead activation, but also don't keep doing the same thing over and over again. So it's sort of just trying all the keys to see if you can open up the lock. And then helping them to develop a little bit of perspective. I think some people imagine this sort of massive sort of bolt of lightning as you're going to ask them about, the Eagles, and out of nowhere, their loved one's going to come to life and start, lecturing them. So if you are making cookies, and your loved one comes down and they sort of look in for a little while and then go away, that might be a huge win for the family. So the small interest is going to be the huge win. We're talking about kindling that fire until you get that fire burning. So lots of little sparks are better than a big explosion of flame. And then help families notice that many of the people that are all in it together, right? Um, many of us are feeling worried, many of us are feeling isolated or suspicious or having sleep problems or self esteem problems and doubts. So that they have the same thing as everybody else has, this horrible disease that we're all human and we're all in this thing together. Again, I want to thank all of the partners who have been jumping in to sort of make sure this is out there. The Peak at the University of Pennsylvania, people in Georgia and Los Angeles and Utah, and everybody's been really excited about this. Please get this information out to other people. So if you know somebody who's doing this type of work and it would be helpful, please get it out to them. Again, I'm Dr. Aaron Brinen, an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry. With that, I'm going to open it up to questions. The questions, actually, a really good point that came up. Catherine Connor made this, so thanks. I think it's important. Is a lot of those traditions, make sure that we're all doing those traditions and keeping them up, meal times, things like that. It also creates a little bit of like a mixture between summer camp and cruise ship. Is we don't want our loved one, the loved one, to come out and there's really nothing going on and that they're bored, and so that can be really helpful. So keeping those things up is really good. Um, Advice on trying to balance engaging clients in activities in which they are interested and managing getting billable sessions as per program administration requirements, which aren't always the best way to engage people. So that's a really, really good question. That came from Sam, and I know where you, that's creepy to say, I know where you live, but Sam is a great part of a great first episode team. So the trick here is, and so I'm going to tell you, we're not talking about gaming the system. What we really need to do is understand, and I go through this in the webinar on telehealth. We need to understand, and this is going to sound very unrecovery oriented, but thinking about what are we treating? What is this treatment aimed at? What are the treatment aimed at helping? And so the first part is the negative symptoms. But the negative symptoms are related to beliefs about why try, things aren't going to work out anyway. I can't do things until I get the energy. A little mistake is as bad as a complete catastrophe. And things aren't going to be fun, so why try? And so these activities are experiential learning about are experiential ways to test out those beliefs. And so it becomes really, really important that that you're helping people to draw those conclusions and test those beliefs out. And so things might be more fun than they are. And so that's that part of guided discovery that happens at the end of every one of these activities. And it really is important that you're drawing those conclusions, or else you shouldn't be billing. You are just sort of showing up and cooking together. But when you go out for a walk together and the person can learn, oh, wow, I feel better when I'm walking. That stuff doesn't bother me so much when I go out for a walk. Or, oh man, I made bread today and I feel so much better, so I'm not so worried about the bad things that are happening. When I do those things, I'm less likely to, then I start engaging in those behaviors later. So that really is sort of the core and the seeds that become activity scheduling. Everybody be well, wash your hands, and take some time to do stuff for yourselves. This is only going to grind on. Anybody who says that it's not going to keep going doesn't know what they're talking about, or isn't listening to doctors. So take time, take care of yourself, celebrate those things, keep up your interventions.